Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm in conversation with the indomitable and ever gracious Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank was 55 years young when a spam email inspired her to sit down and start writing her first mystery. Isn't it nice to know that spam occasionally serves a purpose? Primetime, the first of 4 novels featuring TV reporter Charlotte McNally, resulted, and won Hank her first Agatha Award. You could call this story Success in the Second Act. Of course, Hank was no stranger to success in her first act either. As the longtime on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV, she's now won 37 Emmy Awards, yes, 37, among dozens of other accolades and honors. She's wired herself with hidden cameras, chased down criminals, and confronted corrupt politicians, and her groundbreaking reporting has changed laws and lives. You see, the girl from Indiana who grew up reading Nancy Drew had decided that she wanted to be the detective rather than writing about the detective, and going undercover allowed her to play that Sherlock role. But writing crime fiction has also allowed her to act as Watson, and now she happily does both, which makes her sleuth and scribe. And it turns out that impulse to write a mystery, which she credits to complete naivete, was a good one. Hank now has 12 books to her credit, including the Jane Ryland thrillers, and has won 5 Agathas, 3 Anthonys, the Daphne, and the prestigious Mary Higgins Clark Award. You know, in addition to all those Emmys. Hank's newest, The First to Lie, is her third standalone novel. Here's her seriously intriguing soundbite. Betrayal, motherhood, obsession, revenge. Could being someone else get you what you want? She's undercover in a high-stakes cat and mouse game, but is she the cat or the mouse? The buzz for this book is already reaching fever pitch. Can you hear it? With numerous best of and top picks distinctions. Publishers Weekly gave The First to Lie a starred review, noting, stellar. Ryan could win a 6th Agatha with this one. While we won't know for sure until next year, there's a pretty good precedent. And now, my friends, you're going to get the story behind the story from none other than Hank Phillippi Ryan herself. Hi, everybody. I am very happy tonight to be in conversation with Hank Phillippi Ryan, who is the author of The First to Lie, which will be out on August 4th, which is very, very soon. Hey, Hank, welcome to the show.
It is very, very soon. It's one of those things where it seemed like such a long time away, and now it's right around the corner, and I'm in the complete midst of pre-launch craziness. I mean, the days go by so quickly, and I have stacks and stacks of things to do, and it's incredibly exciting, and it's incredibly crazy. The times are so weird, and the whole situation is so weird. And I keep saying, we're always safe inside a book. And so I'm hoping that this is what my book and all of our books provide, is a little bit of respite, just you can be someone else for a while and be somewhere else for a while and have a little bit of an escape. And that's what I hope The First to Lie is. I used to say I want people to miss their stop on the subway because they're reading the book so diligently. But now I'll just say maybe you want one more chapter before you go to sleep. That's the kind of book I like to write.
Sure. Well, it is the great escape. And all right, I have to tell people, I'm going to forewarn them, and you basically broached this topic, but this is not the type of book, that you pick up before bed and you say, okay, I'm going to read a chapter to get a little taste, and then I'm just going to put it down and go to sleep. And, I know you, I know your books. I think I've read them all at this point. And still, it was 11:30 the other night. And, I had a little bit of a second wind, and I said, let me just start this book. And so I picked it up, and I did, and then I looked at my clock, and it was 2 a.m, and I was 120 pages or something into the book, and I had to force myself to go to sleep because, of course, there are adult responsibilities in the morning, but that's what happens when you read one of your books, and The First to Lie certainly, lives up to that. So don't start this book at 11:30 at night if you can't afford to stay up until all hours.
And that is so perfect. That is exactly what I hope will happen to people. It's interesting. I don't know the ends of my books before I write them. So I don't know what's coming next in the book until I write the next word and the next sentence and the next paragraph. So that's what gets me to the computer every day, is I can't wait to see what happens next because I don't know until I write it. And so I kind of wonder whether, and I hope that that experience sort of translates to the reader as well. That sort of, please tell me, please tell me, please tell me. I can't wait to understand this. And it's so exciting and so compelling. So thank you. That is very reassuring to hear.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I may have been cursing the next morning because, mornings are ugly, but I feel like it was a pretty good reason to be, up late. It was a nice diversion of my attention for, those couple hours.
Interesting because, when you don't know what's coming next, you don't know the ending. So,
right.
And you don't know the twists in the middle and you don't know any of the twists. It just happens, it's a surprise. So people say, wow, all the twists in your books, talk about the twist in the middle and the twist halfway through and the twist 3/4 of the way through and twist and then the ending. And they say, what a surprise. And I say, yeah, wasn't that a surprise? Talk about a surprise ending. I surprise myself every time. And that is, Sue Grafton used to call that the magic of writing and the magic of storytelling. That things, if you're lucky, things in your book just happen. And, you're just lucky enough to be able to get them down as fast as you can.
Right. And, it's funny that we'd be talking about that now because I was actually going to broach the topic a little bit later because, there is that whole great divide between the plotter and the pantser, and you come down on the pantser side of things. And I was going to ask you, whether you thought the fact that you're surprised all throughout the writing process translates to the reader being surprised as well. But I think we've just established that that is probably true. And that's kind of a good thing. I mean, if ever there was an argument to be made for the pantser, how can you beat it?
Well, thank you. I always think when I grow up, I'm going to have an outline. I'm going to be a fully formed, self-actualized adult and write an outline. But I just can't do it. It's really kind of, I've tried to because it seems like it would be such a wonderful thing to have. And I was talking to Lee Child about this at one point, actually, and he doesn't use an outline either. And we were talking about why that would be. And we sort of theorized that one of the reasons is that since we were both journalists, I still am on the air in Boston, that we're out, when we're doing a story, we're out looking for the story. I mean, if we knew what the answer was, it wouldn't be a news story. It wouldn't be journalism. It wouldn't be new. I do investigative stories, news stories. And so I'm not afraid too often to just go search for the story and see what unfolds on the page, because often, just like life, things happen that you don't expect or that you could never have concocted in a synopsis. When you're in the midst of the story and your brain is just going and people are crashing into each other, things happen and there are actions and reactions and motivations and results. And I think until you're in the real world of the book, there's no way to plan that. Just like life, there's no way to plan that.
Sure. No, I think that's a point well taken. So, speaking of these books, let's talk about The First to Lie. I want to ask you in a very general sort of broad sense to begin with, about the title and even the opening page of this book, about the lies that we tell to other people, about the lies that maybe we tell to ourselves. Can you talk about how that, your title, The First to Lie, really is the jumping off point for this fabulous story? So in a general sense, can you tell us about that?
Yes, in a general sense, and there's nothing but general about it. And here's the secret of the title of The First to Lie. When I was writing my previous book, The Murder List, there's a scene in it where one of the characters is talking to a police officer. And the police officer says to her, well, the first to talk is the first to walk. I mean, everybody knows that phrase. The first to rat out the other guy is the first to get the lighter sentence. And my character said in the book, yeah, but what about the first to lie? And I thought, oh, that seems like a good title, The First to Lie. And, of course, I wrote what the character said, but it was one of those moments sort of in the zone when I was being the character and just saying what she was saying. And so she actually said it. I didn't say it, but you know what I mean. But when I wrote it, I thought, wow, that's a good title. That is a meaningful, multi-layered, possibly multi-meaninged title. And so I had the title before I had the story. And that is where that title came from. Isn't that, that is so surprising.
Yeah, and I would say, between the title and really the first page, like you're not going to put it down. It's like after
Right.
this page, I cannot put this down. But so let me ask you. So your protagonist here, Ellie, is much like yourself, an investigative reporter. Though she's a little bit newer. She's new to Boston. She's gonna hopefully be one of the faces of the new Channel 11 news, and so she's looking for a scoop. She really needs a big story to help make an impression and get herself on the air. And she sort of starts to look into big pharma, and she finds this drug company that's manufacturing a drug that is used off-label for the treatment of infertility. And, the company is not disclosing some of the very, negative consequences of taking that particular drug for women who are trying to have children. So can you talk about, how you draw on real life and actual stories and use that as a jumping off point for fiction that's very much based in the realities of the world that we live in?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I'm always fascinated to hear how people, wise readers, describe a book. Because, even though the milieu of it is big pharma, you see in the book that that's not really what it's about. It's sort of like the tablecloth that the book story of the book is laid on. The book can't exist without that. No question about it. That is critical to the book. That's the setting of the book is Boston in this world of big pharma. But really, it's about the patients who take this drug, the women who take this drug, and what they're told and what they hope and what they're promised and how they feel and how invested they are personally with their families and their lives and their futures, and how that calculus plays in to how big pharma deals with the big picture, when really the big picture is individual people. So if you said, describe The First to Lie in 4 spoiler-free words, I would say betrayal, motherhood, obsession, and revenge. And you see how I would not even say big pharma
Right.
in it, because it's just the setting. But it is so, I have gone undercover a million times, and we can talk about that, and several times into doctors' offices, and we can talk about that. But the essence of The First to Lie really is secrets. And what it's what if you knew a terrible secret and you were terribly betrayed by that? How far would you go in your obsession, in your search, in your need for justice and revenge? And are justice and revenge the same thing? So The First to Lie is really 2 women on an obsessive path to revenge, each trying to prove their truth about this terrible betrayal. So they're playing this high-stakes psychological cat and mouse game about this terrible betrayal, but which one is the cat and which one is the mouse? So it's a very personal human story about how we all make decisions, and what does disclosure mean, and how do we make reasonable, educated decisions, and what would cause someone to lie to you or cover something up to you, whether it's money, whether it's somebody who says, oh, I was trying to do what was right. I was trying to do the right thing. And the tangle of the lies that come with passion for wanting revenge and wanting justice, and how that meshes together. These 2 women, both bent on revenge, only one of them can succeed, because when one of them succeeds, the other one fails. And that's the conflict that drives this very human, psychological, emotional story. I don't like graphic sex in books.
Right.
I don't like graphic violence in books. I don't like inappropriate language in books, but I do like mind games and obsession and manipulation and gaslighting that kind of psychological weapon can be stronger even than a physical weapon, than a gun or a knife, convincing someone to do something because you want them to. And how would you have to do that to make that happen and what the result of that could be.
Sure. And that makes me think, no wonder you're always a candidate for the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and you won it, because I think that your books, and her books have that in common, where there's no gratuity. You get this great mystery, and it's kind of a mind bender, but it's not going to be the excessive, the violence and the sex and the swearing. And I think that's, why a lot of people would share her books through the generations, and why people feel comfortable, sharing your books. It's the grandparent, the parent, the child, and everybody can sort of enjoy it together, which I think is a
Thank you. I mean, there's murder and there's deception and people are not good people, many of them. And this is a very ugly situation and it's a very emotional situation. It's a psychological thriller through and through. If you like Sherry LaPena and Ruth Ware and Samantha Bailey and Samantha Downing and those kinds of really fast-paced, twisty thrillers, this is what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that, you let the readers fill in the blank. I mean, we know what we're dealing with, we know what the situation is, but do you really need to see the blood, the guts? No, because, I think a lot of times it's scarier in our own minds because we know what our definition of fear is.
It's interesting. I was reading a book by Jeffrey Deaver, and I think it was Jeffrey Deaver, and he writes really gruesome villains. I mean, they are diabolically gruesome. But in one chapter, he had the villain plug in an iron, and then that was the end of the chapter. And I'm like, oh, please. That was scarier than any graphic description of anything. And that's what I'm kind of going for, is our imaginations are much richer and much creepier than anything that anybody could ever write. And so that's what I'm sort of going for. Imagine what happens now. Turn the page.
Well done, you. Yeah, but I did want to go back to something you mentioned a bit ago, sort of, the emotional feel of this book, because everybody knows, if they pick up a Hank Phillippi Ryan book, it's going to be, propulsive, it's plotted really well, but I feel like, your books have an emotional resonance to them, and I would say this one maybe more than some of the others, and I'm not sure if that's just because, it's the one that I've read the most recently, so it's freshest in my mind. But, can you talk about how you bring that emotion authentically to the page, particularly, dealing with these women who populate the book, who have issues of fertility or infertility, and who really want children, and some of them can't have those children? I would think that, it's something that you want to capture the authenticity of, and you want to be sensitive to it rather than sensational. So what is that balancing act like for you?
Oh, thank you. That's a really good way of putting it, sensitive rather than sensational. And thank you. It's interesting because when I'm writing a character, the first thing I think about is, what does this person want and how far will they go to get it? And then I think, okay, why do they want that? What is it that happened to them that made them want that? And so you sort of peel back. I mean, I think it's all about motivation in these kinds of books. Something happens because something happened before, and then something happens as a result of that, and something happens as a result of that. And then the characters begin to make decisions along the way based on what they want, and again, how far they'll go to get it. So when I'm writing Ellie and Nora and Meg, it's sort of like method acting, actually. Since I'm writing from Meg's point of view or Ellie's point of view or Nora's point of view, I try to sort of become them. So I'm writing about them, but I'm really writing as them. So when my writer brain kicks in, it may say, what's she going to do now and why? What is she really after? How would she see this situation? How would she understand what somebody is saying to her? and what does she think they mean? Because of course, as an author, sort of apart from the book, I know what the other person means when they're saying whatever it is. Am I just babbling here? But the character doesn't know that.
Right.
So everything the character does is through that character's point of view, what they want, why they want it, who they're talking to, whether they believe them, what they're trying to get that person to do, what they want from that person, and to what end. So we all live our lives with goals. And so I try to give each character a goal and have them power through the book with the engine of that goal, be they good or bad, right? Because the bad people have goals too, and they have motivations too, and they're manipulating people to get what they want to. So the people in the story is sort of the power of want and the power of desire and the power of need to have the world be the way you want it to be, and have the people who hurt you realize they hurt you. And sometimes that can inure to the greater good, and sometimes it can inure to the greater evil. And that's what the battle is. So I make myself the characters. I make myself be each person and see the world through their brains. And then that's what comes out. So if someone was really devastatingly betrayed as a child, how does that, I mean, that doesn't go away. You can't erase that. That gets festered over and tucked into a little part of their heart and brain that's going to affect everything that they do. You know, if someone is trying to escape a thing, and they do, and you can't erase your history though, that's inside you. So no matter how hard you pretend to be someone else, you really are you inside. We've all had that feeling. We've all gone into a thing and pretended to be a certain way, and inside we're either terrified or annoyed or after something that we're, that we're trying to get. People are trying to get something. And sometimes you have to be someone else to get what you want.
Sure.
That is what the book is about.
Sure, and yet that, human Google search, like the actual Google search, it never goes away. It will always be there, and someone will always find it. But let me ask you too, so, your protagonist, Ellie, as I mentioned a little bit ago, is an investigative reporter, and she's sort of, at the beginning of her career, and she really wants to make a name for herself. And you obviously have done this for many, many years. People know you. I think, unless I missed something at my last check, you've won 36 Emmys, but, you might have gotten another one or two when I wasn't paying attention.
Actually, I did.
Oh,
I actually just, this is a good story too, and I haven't told this ever because it just happened. But, the Emmys, the event was canceled this year because of COVID, like everything else.
Right.
The Emmys was canceled. And so I did win. I found out on Twitter. And,
of course.
And today, the FedEx guy delivered this big package, which is the Emmy, all wrapped up. And I tried to get him to let me give a speech to the FedEx guy, but he didn't really want to hear it. But we did win, so I'm very excited about it. But anyway, I interrupted you.
No,
yes,
congratulations. That's excellent. I'm glad I said that. But, maybe that guy's going to watch this show and he's going to have regrets.
Right. He could have heard my speech.
Well, if you want to make the speech here. But so let me ask you, investigative reporting, I would assume, again, there's a fine balance with that. You have this story, you have to get to the truth, and I would assume that sometimes there's maybe a conflict between what you're feeling personally, what you're feeling professionally, what your real obligation is. So having done that for so many years, can you talk about what you're able to draw on to create these journalist characters and sort of, the ethical dilemmas that they find themselves with, but also, in their own mind, the conflict that they sometimes have?
It's really interesting. I was thinking about this just the other day, that as a reporter, when I'm doing journalism, my Hank is really undercover in that role, right? Because how I feel, whether I wanted to do the story or whether somebody assigned it to me, how I feel about the people that I interview, how I feel about the topic itself. That I may have shot 15 hours of video, but I can only use 2.5 minutes. And what is it that went into the deciding of what 2.5 minutes to use? I'm taking this big, complicated story and making it into a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, with a problem that needs to be solved and a character who you care about, and you want the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them, and in the end you want some justice and you want to change the world. But me, Hank, how I feel about that, that is buried in the story. You will never know that. So each reporter, and this is sort of the undercover theme, each reporter doing a story is undercover in that story. So when I write fiction, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to do that. When I'm doing a television story, you won't know, just as you say, what ethical and moral dilemmas, how we all sat around and said, is this fair? Can we do this? Do we have enough? Should we send it to the lawyers? Is this harming more people than it's helping? We discuss that up one side and down the other, but you will never see that. But or is it fair what we asked? Or did we leave the wrong thing out? Or all those kinds of constant questions. But you won't know that in my television stories. But in the books, the reporter can come out from undercover in fiction and reveal what really it takes to get a story on the air, and how hard we work, and how much pressure we're under, in a good way and in a bad way, to get a story on the air. And that people will call me with the tip and say, but don't put this on TV right now. And I say, do you know how hard it is to get something on television? And just because you're calling me and telling me something doesn't mean I'm going to put it on TV, please. So your question is so perfect, because it is in fiction. I mean, I've wired myself with hidden cameras and confronted corrupt politicians and chased down criminals and gone undercover and in disguise. And it's difficult to do. And so it's really fun to come out from behind that curtain and be able to explain fictionally what a real reporter goes through, the good ones and the bad ones.
Right. And I think, one of the reasons I like your book so much is as a reader, knowing that you've lived that life and continue to do so, I think it resonates so powerfully on the page. And so I think, reporters writing reporters and lawyers who write lawyers, there is that believability in it. Like when I'm reading a Marcia Clark book, I'm like, yes, she's been there. This is real.
And she's wonderful. And that's the thing that is so beautiful about that, is that my books are not my television stories made into fiction. That is not what it is. It's just the years of experience and emotion and seeing how people behave and how people answer questions and what people look like when they lie and how manipulative they can be and how often they omit the thing. I mean, how many times have I said to a person I'm interviewing, what's the thing you're not telling me? I can hear that. I know that they're leaving the thing out that they think is going to harm the story. And after, I can recognize that. And so I was interviewing a person once who said, I was asking him about a certain carcinogens that were in a water supply. And I asked him, were these carcinogens in the water supply? And he said, we have no evidence of those carcinogens. And I said, did you look? Have you actually tested? And he's like, no. So I said, so you don't have any, it's not that you have no evidence, it's that you haven't looked for evidence, so you have no idea what's in the water.
Yes,
and he said, yeah, that's right.
It's convenient when you don't look for it. But yeah, and I think, in a book like yours, there's that essence of truth. It may not be a literal truth, but it's the essence of truth, that comes through. And I did want to ask you too, you always, have a journalist or reporter character in your books. And I would think that, So it's not necessarily an amateur sleuth, because really, if you're investigative
No,
reporter,
no.
that's sort of another name for a detective. So can you talk a little bit about the ways that an investigative reporter, would start to research a topic, and how that sort of mirrors what an authority figure would do who's looking into a potential crime? Because it's actually pretty similar.
It is pretty similar. And you can imagine, if you're a police officer or a detective looking into a story, you're looking through documents and tracking down clues and talking to people and talking to people and talking to people and talking to people. You find out who's involved and who has a stake in it one way or the other. You see what documents might be connected to it, who has experience in this kind of thing, what does everybody else say. There's just a big series of endless questions and research and looking and digging and that kind of thing. As a reporter, I can't force someone to tell me something like a police officer can. I can't subpoena someone like the court can. I can't have a search warrant to go into their house and look at things. So it has to be things that either someone leaks to me, and that happens, which then I still have to confirm that they're real, but someone leaking or telling me something that puts me on the trail of something, and then I know where to look for that. So if someone calls me and gives me a tip and says, you should look into this, then I can start doing that. So there are lots of things that I can't do. I can't demand things, force people to give me something, throw them in prison if they do something wrong. But I can try to tease out a story through experiences and interviews and documents. Often the story is there. If you just know where to look and you know how to find it and you know how to put the puzzle pieces together in a way perhaps that nobody's done before, or in a way that nobody's cared about before. That's what happened with our story about the 911 system in Massachusetts. It started with a phone call from a woman who said her son was choking. He turned out to be okay, but the ambulance hadn't arrived, and she had called 911 and the ambulance hadn't arrived. And when she called back, they said, no, we're right outside your door. And she said, no, there's nobody outside my door. And it turned out that in the database of 911 in Massachusetts, which was just data entry, someone had made a mistake and put in a wrong address for her. So right. According to 911, they were at the right address, but in reality, they weren't. So my investigative reporter brain, and this is how it works, my investigative reporter brain thought, well, if it happened to her, how many other times has this happened? And are there problems in the state's 911 system? And after a year of trying to get documents under the Freedom of Information Act, I guess the Public Records Act in Massachusetts, we had to go all the way to the Attorney General's office to have her demand that the State Telecommunications Board give us all the documents on the 911, what they're called discrepancies, the times when an ambulance or a firefighter or police were sent to the wrong address because of 911. And we found out that it happened thousands and thousands of times a year in Massachusetts, but no one was keeping track of it. They sent me, at one point, I said, I want every single discrepancy report. There's a piece of paper for each mistake. And they sent me this huge cardboard box where it looked like somebody had just taken a bunch of papers and swooped them into the box. And they're like, here, sister, you wanted it, you got it. And I spent all of one Sunday, sorting 351 piles on my dining room floor, the dining room floor, all the reports for every single city and town in Massachusetts. And at the end of Sunday night, I knew which cities and towns in Massachusetts had the most 911 errors and what exactly had happened. And I had looked at so many pieces of paper that I had so many paper cuts that my hands were bleeding and there was blood on the documents. So now my producer and I always talk about, if it's a good story, that means there's blood on the documents.
Sure.
But as a result of that story, the 911 system was changed. And so that's the fuel. That's what happens. That's why we do what we do. And that's why one little domino that falls in a story, in journalism or in a novel like The First to Lie, one little domino falls, one little question gets asked, one wrong person finds out one clue, and then it all just snowballs. And that's what happens in journalism, and that's what happens in writing a novel. You know, you just get a good idea, and then it starts to work, knock on wood. And that's what I hope happened in The First to Lie. So that's why my books, I hope, sound authentic, because that's what I've done for the past 43 years.
Sure. And yeah, it really is that what if moment, and it just propels you forward. And, you know, I wanted to ask you too, because if memory serves, you were an Indiana girl, but you've been in and around Boston for a really, really long time now. And I feel like, you know, you have a very palpable sense of place in this book, and Boston is used, and it's sort of this weird, you know, March, springtime that's not really spring. And I feel like it sets a really interesting atmosphere for the book. So can you talk about, you know, how you bring Boston to life, the Boston that you know, in both its, you know, its good ways and maybe sometimes it's not so good or glamorous ways?
Well, Boston, you know, Boston is so diverse and so crazy, and there's so many different neighborhoods and so many different accents, and it's all so historic. So many things happened here for the past hundreds of years, and it's all so sort of cutting edge technology, and there are so many new, you know, innovations are happening here. It's so culturally gorgeous. There's just something beautiful and new and historic everywhere you go, and people are fast-paced and going places and care about things. But you know, the beautiful State House and the beautiful Boston Common. I always think about, you know, the historical figures who walked on the same ground that we are, in the public garden, and it's really beautiful. So what I try to do in my books is I pick a month that is, because every month is different. Every month is different in Boston, and they're not quite like every place else. And so when you have Boston in the snow, it's a completely different Boston than Boston in the sweltering summer like it is right now. It's 90 here, I think. And people behave differently and people act differently. And there's the Boston Harbor is different, and people are sailing, and the seagulls are squawking, and people are sitting outside. And when you know what the real world is like, then you set your characters in that world, and then they have to react to it. You know, in Boston, in March, it gets dark at 4 o'clock. You know, it's still dark then. Not really 4, but okay, 5 in March. But it's dark then, and the street lights come on, and it's just a different feeling. Or Boston in the snow, in The First to Lie, it's snowing like crazy in The First to Lie. And what happens as a result of snow? It's not just snowing, but it's slick streets and poor visibility and footprints that are or aren't there because they may or may not get covered up. So they're either clues or gone. So I use the terrible traffic and the ridiculous drivers and the unpredictable weather and the three-decker houses and the brownstones and the beautiful houses in Wellesley and Dover. You know, all that. It is Boston, but it is also part of the book. So it's so terrible. I know my husband and I will be driving on the Mass Pike, and I'll say, "Oh, exit 17. This is where Ellie was chased by the bad guy." And I think, no, I made that up. That's in the book. You know, that's not the real exit 17. So it all sort of, it's lovely when it's lovely and weird when I'm at a place that's in my book, and I think, well, this is where that happened. There's a particular this is so silly, but there's a particular air conditioner on Beacon Street that drips on me every time that I walk under it in the summer. You know, that condensation.
Oh yeah.
So I put that in the book too.
I know, and it's great because, you know, I mean, there will be people who say, you know, setting is not character, that's ridiculous, but it really is. I mean, it comes to life, it lends itself to the story, and, you know, the people who say that should read this book, and then they might think otherwise. But, you know, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but let me ask you a few more general questions, if you don't mind. I did want to ask you, so a lot of people, you know, who came to your books early know you for your series. I think your first 9 books were split between 2 different series, and your last 3, including The First to Lie, are standalones. So in thinking about, you know, the differences between writing a standalone versus a series, when it comes to standalone, can you tell me, you know, what the greatest liberty or liberties are of that, but also the biggest challenge, as opposed to having a series as a jumping off point?
it's so different. It's so completely different. It's crazy, crazy, crazy different. And it's either, each of them has its pluses and minuses, as you so wisely say. In a series, you know, the challenge for an author in a series is that the suspense cannot come from the mortality of the main character. Jane Ryland in The Other Woman is not going to die at the end of The Other Woman, because you know the wrong girl is coming, and you know, truth be told is coming. So the main characters, Jake and Jane, in my series, and then the Jane Ryland series, the suspense has to come from somewhere else. The tension has to come from somewhere else. And it's a tough thing for an author, because even though we have the benefit of knowing the setting, knowing the relationships, and knowing that there'll be a bigger arc of the personal journey, and that each book will have an adventure that will end, you know, the mystery will be solved at the end, but the characters go on. And the reader knows that the characters will go on. So even though the readers may be, you know, fraught with the adventure of what the characters are going through, they know in the end that it will be okay, which is the good news and the bad news, because you have to make it be scary for, you know, you have to make it be super life and death stakes, actually life and death stakes for someone else in a series. But in a standalone, smart readers know anything goes, anything goes. You know, anybody can be good, anybody can be bad, anybody can start out good and end up bad, or start out bad and end up good. Anybody can be lying, and anyone can be guilty, and anyone can die. Anyone can die. It is all on the table. You do not know when you pick up a Standalone, The First to Lie, or The Murder List, or Trust Me, you do not know when you pick up that book who's coming out on the other end. Because this is the way I look at a Standalone, it's the most important thing that's ever happened in these characters' lives. So this is the only thing you need to know. This is the crux of the thing. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened to Meg and Nora and Ellie and Brooke and Lacey. And Gabe. This is the most important thing that will ever happen in their lives. And they had a life before, clearly they do, and they have a life after, some of them do. But what you need to know is in the book, and you're done. And as a result of that, the reader can go into The First to Lie just knowing that it's all up for grabs. I knew as I was writing it, this is all on the table. And every single page, something surprised me about The First to Lie. And I loved not knowing, and I loved that I had the power to do anything I wanted in the book and have it turn out any way I wanted in the book. And I've gotten emails from people who read The First to Lie, who had early copies like you do, who said that they went back after they had read it, that they went back and started from the beginning to read it again, knowing what happened. And I'm not just talking about the end, but
Right.
knowing what happens to see how I did it. And I've got to tell you, that is the biggest, most glorious thing in the world, to have people say, wait a minute, how did she do that? And have them so much want to, deconstruct the architecture of it to figure that out. So that is a real blessing. That is just completely great.
I was going to say, it must be a thrill for somebody to read your book the first time, but to go back and read it again has to be like over the moon. All right, so final two questions, if you don't mind, and then I will let you get back to your evening and your Emmy. You should spend some quality time with that new Emmy tonight. But I did want to ask you, about your readers, because you have, a very reciprocal relationship with your readers, and you really in ways invite them into your life. So can you talk about the dynamic of that relationship, and also what the best way for readers to connect with you is?
Well, my books don't live until readers read them. So the readers, you readers, are the most important beings in my entire life. I mean, it's just such a part of it. And I the idea of sending my little book out into the universe, into your hands, and then having you open the pages and meet Meg and Ellie and Nora and figure out who The First to Lie really is, that is my life. I know this sounds really silly, but that is my life. So I love to talk to readers about that. I'd love to connect with them. I'm way too much on Facebook and Instagram at Hank P. Ryan on Instagram and Hank P. Ryan on Twitter and at Hank Phillippi Ryan author on Facebook. And even my website, you can click on contact at hankphillippiryan.com, clever name, comes right to me. So I want to know, I want to be in their lives and hear what they think about books and my books and any books, and hear what questions they have for me. How did this happen and how did this work? I mean, they know I'm 70 years old and I didn't start writing until I was 55. And so that's a thing, you know, for people, is that I'm sort of the poster child for following your dreams in midlife. And I think sometimes people understand that and sort of grasp that, and feel that I know what I'm doing a little bit and that I'm like them. And so I really embrace that.
Well, this is a beautiful transition, because my final question to you was going to be, you know, about coming to this career later in life after you've already established yourself, you know, as a very successful reporter. But can you talk about, you know, that dream of being a writer and, you know, how you finally found the confidence, the courage to go after it a little bit later in life? And also, you know, the words of advice or encouragement that you would give to people who are in a similar circumstance and are just looking for the reason to do it, or just need to hear that one word and it's okay, you know, to go after that dream. So I look to you as an inspiration. And I think, as I told you before we started recording, whenever I feel bad about the things I haven't accomplished, I think, well, I can do it because Hank did it, and then I feel better.
Plenty of time, right? It's interesting. I love that you said have the courage and the confidence. Is that what you said? That is completely wrong. That is completely wrong. There was no courage and there was no confidence.
Don't do any of that. Don't have courage, don't have confidence, but like, this is going to inspire you right now.
So it's interesting because it was the opposite of courage and confidence. It was just naivete and ridiculousness. I had a really good idea for a book. You know, I was 55. I'd always wanted to, well, you know, I grew up reading mysteries, Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, and then all the wonderful Golden Age mysteries, Niall Marsh and Josephine Tey and Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy Sayers. Loved those. And then I moved into thrillers like Failsafe and Alas, Babylon and On the Beach, and then Day of the Jackal and Eye of the Needle. Those kinds of wonderful books I loved. But I kind of thought I would maybe rather be a detective than be a writer. You know, it's one or the other, but maybe it'd be cooler to be Sherlock Holmes than it would be to write about Sherlock Holmes. So years passed, you know, I was a Shakespeare major in college. I went on to be a reporter. I'm a very curious person, and I love to tell stories. And so I began to tell real life stories via journalism. But one day I just had what I knew was a really good idea for a book. I knew it was, and I came home and I said to my husband, sweetheart, I've got a great idea for a mystery. I'm gonna write a novel. And Jonathan says, great, honey, do you know how to write a mystery? And I'm like, how hard can it be? You know, I've read a million of these. I've read a million of them. Well, I soon found out how hard it could be, but I was obsessed. I mean, I was obsessed with my story, just as obsessed as I get with my television stories. I was obsessed with writing this book. And that turned out to be Prime Time, which won the Agatha for Best First Novel. I think you can see it behind me. Won the Agatha for Best First Mystery. And that sort of set me on this crazy new path to being a crime fiction writer, which is ridiculous. So, you know, it's one of those things where I always wonder why people say it's too late to do something. I mean, why would that be? Then you wake up tomorrow and you've lost another day at it, but then you have another day. So just try it. It can't really hurt you. It can't really hurt you to try it. And then think how happy you'll be when you succeed. You know, the worst thing is regret. The worst thing is to say, I wish I had done that. You know, I'm the proof, just go do that. And you may be delightfully surprised.
Well, I think that's the little dose of optimism that we all needed. I know I am going to carry that with me, and I think that's as good an end point as any. So I do want to remind people really quick, though, that this is the new book, The First to Lie. Ah, there it is. Starred review from Publishers Weekly. It's best of this and best of that. It's going to be a big, big read. And Hank Phillippi Ryan, you were ever gracious and generous, and I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you so much for taking time out to be on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care and stay safe. And all of you, take care and stay safe. And I've loved talking to you. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you, Hank. That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.